Fairness was only a joke my father told at supper, laughing as I sat there. And that's how I grew up. I'm Marcus, and I've been playing second for 35 years. I'm grinding my teeth. My younger brother, Damon, the golden child, was born with problems, and I was meant to lead the band as a fiddle. Throughout his first few years, in and out of the hospital, he was weak, delicate, and in continual need of care. And I truly understand that when your child is born, you struggle for his life, whatever it takes to protect him. But what happens when that child grows up and everyone still goes out of their way for him? Let me give you an example. When I was a kid, I was supposed to maintain order in case Damien spilled his juice on the carpet, and I was reprimanded for failing to keep a close enough eye on him. If he broke something, I was instructed to be more responsible, since he was sensitive. I soon discovered that fairness in my household meant different things, depending on who you were. At 7 years old, I was sweeping dishes. Damien never had to do any chores. I was helping my dad in the garage each weekend. If I failed to put my shoes away, I was grounded for 2 days. Meanwhile, my mother would simply sigh, pick up Damien's toys scattered across the living room, and pat his head like he was some helpless dog. I recall wishing for a bike all year long. One Christmas, when Damien was 9 and I was 12, I wrote a letter. After drinking too much whiskey on Christmas Eve, I realized Santa was actually my dad. But I still wrote letters to him. That morning, I hurried downstairs, hoping to see the red mountain bike I had circled a dozen times in, a catalog. But it wasn't there. Instead, Damien received a brand new bike he hadn't even asked for. "You're more responsible," my dad said. "You can use your old one a little longer." Then he gave me a shoulder clap. Damon wasn't accountable for anything, but somehow, by the time we were teenagers, that was my weight to bear. It was impossible to ignore our differences. I was expected to be flawless, get straight A's, never complain, and help others around me. Damien, he skipped school whenever he felt like it, and despite his poor grades, he was the one everyone was concerned about. One day, I was given detention for being late. My dad lectured me for an hour, telling me I was too intelligent to be making foolish decisions. That same month, Damien was caught sneaking out to a party. Did he get punished? No. Dad just warned him to be careful next time. By the time I was 15, I had started working for my dad's business, Crestview Contractors. Not because I liked electrical work, but because I thought it was the only way to earn his approval. I worked hard, arrived early, stayed late, and learned everything I could. By 16, I was performing adult-level wiring. By 18, Damien had dropped out of college 2 semesters in because it was too stressful. Even Google gave him money to start some internet drop-shipping garbage business. It flopped in 6 months. Then he tried day trading, lost thousands. Dad dismissed it. Meanwhile, I was breaking my back, bringing in clients, expanding our business, and proving our potential in commercial electrical work. But each time I proposed a new idea, my father dismissed it, until Damien repeated it. The year I built our first website, my dad barely noticed. 2 years later, when Damien suggested a website, my father acted like it was revolutionary. "Your brother is incredibly wise about business," he said, smiling. By my mid-20s, I had nearly thrown my coffee mug against the wall. Everything was going well. I was managing clients and landing big contracts. And Damien? He was still alternating between failures. Yet somehow, I was the one being lectured about the importance of family and the right way to support it. Then came the tipping point. I was 27. Damien had just blown another chunk of my father's money. Some crypto investment nonsense. I had just come home from a 12-hour shift, sweating and aching. I walked in as my dad sighed. "I lost another $5,000. I clenched my jaw. "How many times are you going to help him, Dad?" He sighed, as if I were the one asking for money. As his older brother, You need to be watching out for him. I let out a bitter laugh. Maybe it's time for him to take care of himself. And that was it. My father's face hardened. That was when I realized it didn't matter how hard I worked, how much I sacrificed, or how much I proved myself. Damien would always come first. At 30, I moved out, got my own place, and stopped trying to please my father. I started saving, determined to leave Crestview Contractors because deep down I knew I would never be allowed to run it. And that's when I met Vanessa. At first, I thought she was the best thing that had ever happened to me. Smart, driven, a hard worker. For the first time, I had someone in my life who didn't expect me to clean up after them. I met Vanessa while rewiring a high-rise building. She was a property manager, sharp, no nonsense, and knowledgeable. She caught code violations that others ignored. She demanded perfection, and I was impressed. We started talking. First, about work. Then, about life. We connected, both the eldest, both carrying the weight of responsibility. 1 week after the project ended, Vanessa called the office. Said she had an electrical issue in her apartment. My dad sent me to check it out. When I arrived, she was in the kitchen. I looked around. No issues. So, what's the problem? She smiled. There's nothing wrong. I just wanted to see you. And that's how it started. I laughed. Well, that's one way to get a guy's attention. Vanessa was different. She didn't play games. She said what she meant. For the first time, I had someone who cared, who supported me. She helped me study for my licensing exams. She modernized Crestview Contractors, organizing invoices, setting up a real scheduling system, automating tasks my dad had been doing on paper for years. Even my dad had to admit, Vanessa made everything run smoother. We moved in together. We talked about marriage, kids, a future. For once, things were finally looking up, and then everything fell apart. But betrayal is slow. It's quiet. It's the kind of thing you don't notice until it's too late. And one Tuesday afternoon, it all began with a phone call. My phone buzzed. Vanessa's name, across town, at the warehouse. I answered, and what I heard changed everything. She sighed. Her entire body trembled violently, but she avoided looking at me. I'm pregnant, she said. I grinned at first, since we had discussed and planned for this. We wanted children, but she wasn't smiling. The words that followed shattered my world. Even though this should have been excellent news, I swear, for a few seconds, everything inside of me went still. Because it might not be yours. I had to repeat what she said to be sure I heard it correctly. My brain wouldn't process. It might not be mine? I sensed a gradual, nauseating understanding creeping up my spine. I had to keep my composure and carefully ask, Vanessa. Who? I already knew. I didn't even need to hear the name. I could see it when she finally turned to face me. It was in her eyes, the way she tensed, the way her mouth moved back and forth, as if trying to figure out how to say it. I clenched my fists and forced the words out. Tell me. My voice was deadly. She was silent, only crying harder. I clenched my teeth and said his name. She shook her head and pressed her palms to her face in an attempt to hide behind her own embarrassment. But I already knew. I knew. Damon, I muttered. My throat was dry. She sobbed, and that was all the confirmation I needed. I smacked my fist against the table. I got up so quickly that my chair scraped against the floor. I chuckled, but it wasn't a funny laugh. It was the kind of laugh that comes when your entire world has just caught fire. You're telling me, I said, my voice breaking, that while I was out working my tail off, building our future together, you... She rushed out of the room. I closed, my eyes too disgusted to even say it aloud. My voice came out low and dangerous. Don't you dare tell me it just happened. I slammed my fist against the table so violently that the coffee cup toppled over. She hesitated for a long moment. My heart pounded in my chest as I stepped forward. Vanessa's lip trembled. 3 months, she whispered. Possibly 4. For months. I had been hugging her, kissing her, making plans with her. I turned away. I wasn't sure I could control my rage if I kept looking at her. Daman, the man who had everything, the man who had never worked for anything in his life, the man who had failed at everything, the man who had always been saved by our father, and now he took my wife. I grabbed my truck keys from the counter. Marcus! Vanessa's voice cracked behind me. I didn't pause. I walked out and slammed the door. The walls trembled. I drove straight to my parents' house, and then to Damon. I found him sitting at his desk, casually scrolling through his phone, as if nothing was wrong. The moment he saw my face, his eyes widened. Listen, bro, I can... He didn't finish. My fist met his jaw before he could say another word. His phone bounced across the hardwood floor. I grabbed his collar and yanked him up, slamming him onto the desk. Papers flew everywhere. He muttered, Something, I growled. You slept with my wife. He wasn't paying attention, so I struck him again. Blood dripped from his nose, staining his shirt. Footsteps echoed down the hallway. I turned, gasping for air. My father's voice rang out. Daman wiped the blood from his mouth. He choked, barely able to speak. Dad scowled at me. Still gripping my brother's collar, I hissed, Tell him why I lost it. Daman swallowed hard. His lips trembled. Dad's expression darkened. You slept with my wife. Daman attempted to shrug, but my grip tightened. Dad let out a deep sigh. I know this is bad, but... I laughed bitterly. He destroyed my life, I spat. And then Damon spoke. She's having my baby. Silence. Dad went utterly still. I released Damon, so quickly that he nearly collapsed. This wasn't just betrayal. It was worse. My own brother took everything from me, my wife, my child, and I knew exactly what I was going to do. Betrayal by your spouse is one thing. Betrayal by your own blood, that's something else entirely, and yet none of it prepared me for what happened next. I stood in my parents' house, fists clenched so tightly my knuckles turned white. My chest heaved with each breath. Daman smirked as he wiped the blood from his nose, acting as if Daddy would bail him out of this mess, just like always. Between us, my father, Richard, rubbed his brow as if this were a small inconvenience rather than the destruction of my life. He sighed, not in rage, not in disappointment, but in frustration, at me as if I were the one overreacting. I know this isn't what you were hoping to hear, Dad said, but we need to deal with this as a family. I laughed. Family? I repeated, disbelief heavy in my voice. You want us to sit down and discuss it? Dad's jaw tensed. Over dinner, my voice roared through the house. My mother flinched, frozen by the door. I turned back to Damon. You had the audacity to sit across from me at the dinner table, I seethed, knowing what you were doing behind my back? My voice broke threateningly. Damon rolled his eyes. Look, man,